This is the Visible Voices podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Resa Lewiss. In today's episode, I'm so glad to bring you my conversation with Dr. Sharon Horesh-Berquist. Sharon is the Pam R. Rollins Professor of Medicine at Emory. She's the medical director of Emory's Executive Health Center, a research scientist, a podcaster, and an author. In the conversation, we focus on the content of her new book, The Stress Paradox: Why You Need Stress to Live Longer, Healthier, and Happier. You may or may not be aware, audience, but trends show that we, Americans, are getting fatter, sicker, and more medicated. Now, don't lose hope, because 80% of chronic diseases can actually be prevented. And part of that prevention comes from stress, positive stress. And in fact, here's a word that I've come to really love: hormesis. Hormesis is the science of good stress, the kind of stress that builds resilience. In the book, Sharon focuses on 5 main ways that we can introduce, improve, increase the amount of positive stress in our life. Unsurprisingly, this comes through things like food, what we eat, predominantly plant-based diet, exercise and movement, thermal stress, such as cold and heat, circadian biology, and thinking about the stress when we don't sleep, i.e. we need to sleep, and finally, emotional and mental stress. Before we jump into the conversation, where we will be talking about intermittent fasting and normal eating, I asked Sharon to read a passage from the epilogue of The Stress Paradox.
The science of good stress gives us hope. It's hope for what is possible for each of us. It's hope that wherever you are and whatever you're dealing with, you have the ability to be stronger, better, and healthier. It's hope that what you need to get there is already in you. You have innate gifts that you can stretch and recover, nudge and reshape, and push until you reach the limits of your physical, mental, and emotional potential. This is the science I must take great care not to omit, the science that needed to be shared so it could be practiced. I'm imagining you facing a challenge, but instead of that familiar feeling of dread and overwhelm, it doesn't seem daunting. Now the things that seemed hard feel welcome, even necessary. You look forward to them because you know that they enhance you. The challenges you traded for comfort have become your sources of strength because you know that the rewards of stress are inseparable from its discomfort. This is what I want for you. As I said at the beginning, this book is not about seismic challenges, but rather ordinary ones. It's about leaning into daily stresses and experiencing, if only for brief moments, living outside your comfort zone. And it's trusting that those challenges will build on each other, reshaping and rewiring your body and enabling you to become a stronger, healthier, and happier version of yourself.
Many people have heard about, quote, intermittent fasting, which some people are now calling time-restricted eating. I love the way you're terming it these days as normal eating. This is normal eating. We have just been surrounded by culture and society that has really changed what we have come to know as, quote, normal eating.
In the United States, if you look at when people eat, it's over a 15-hour window. And our bodies can either grow when we are eating, so we're building up our storage of energy, or we break down energy when we're not eating. When we are spending more than 12 hours in this eating phase, we're continually building up, but we're not taking adequate time to break down. And that is one of the largest drivers behind what we're seeing. About 75% of America right now is overweight or obese. And we don't think enough about the timing of our meals. We're so focused on what we're eating, but when we eat actually makes a really large difference in the outcome. So people who eat big meals late at night and then end with a midnight snack. So about 45% of calories in this country are consumed at dinner and later. What we're essentially doing is that we're staying in this build-up phase. And in studies that have looked at people over time, like over a 4-year mark, that late night eating increases the risk of obesity 2-fold in men and 3-fold in women.
Can you repeat that stat? Because it's pretty outstanding.
Yeah. When we look longitudinally over a 4-year time period and people who consume late night meals and snack after dinner, the rate of obesity is twofold higher in men and threefold higher in women. So the timing is critical, and part of that relates to our circadian biology. Our body is really designed to have our highest metabolism early in the morning and lowest in the evening. And our circadian biology is such that our insulin levels are lower as the day goes on. So when we're eating the same meal later in the day, we cannot metabolize the sugar as effectively. So again, same calories, different time of day, it makes a big difference in the outcome metabolically.
I love this concept of thinking about that our cells have timers and clocks as well, and going back to the time to rest, and that they need to rest and do their work without constantly being taxed with more food to process, more food to process, more food to process. They too need to do their work when the body is resting and sleeping.
Exactly. So we're talking at a physiologic level between buildup and breakdown. At a cellular level, it's even more profound because, as you said, our cells are growing when we give it food, but our cells need time to repair. They need that housekeeping function. And your cells are essentially saying, look, I am operating inefficiently. I haven't had time to do housekeeping, to recover, to rest. And that is another key source of damage, because what is happening is that the root cause of disease comes down to the cellular level. When our cells have impaired proteins that we haven't cleaned out, so we didn't take out the trash that day from the store, and when our cells didn't get time to repair their DNA, we're accumulating the underlying causes of what leads to disease. So the clumping of the proteins increases the risk of dementia. When we don't repair the DNA, we're increasing that risk of cancer. So we have got to give our bodies time to do the healing. And with all these stressors, people think of, oh, this is biohacking. And what I can't say enough or emphasize enough is this is a coming home to what our bodies are yearning for. This is normal living. It's not just normal eating. This is a normal lifestyle, every piece of it. And our culture has deviated so much from what our bodies need that our bodies are screaming for help. So this is essentially a going back to the basics, and we've got to get the basics down.
100%, Dr. Berquist. You discuss in the book emotional and mental stress, performance anxiety, and how actually, to a certain extent, actually that kind of stress can help us perform well.
Yeah. When we look at stress, it's not that, oh, well, we just have to tough it out and work harder, and that's, going to make us more resilient and you're strong. It's the type of stress that makes a difference. We think of stress as a fight or flight response, but our stress response is so much more complicated depending on the type of stress that we take on. When we take on stressors that are meaningful, aligned with our values, generative, so bigger than us, when we are making a difference beyond ourselves, the biochemistry of that stress response is very different than what we think of as just cortisol and adrenaline. We're activating our reward pathway.
Endocannabinoids?
Endocannabinoids are a big part of that. We're also activating dopamine, the dopaminergic system from our mesolimbic part of our brain. We're activating oxytocin, which is a cuddle hormone is how it's referred to. We're raising our serotonin level. And these chemicals, first of all, they negate the effect of cortisol. So they are improving our stress level. And this is, again, the fascinating paradox, right? We're choosing stress, but the type of stress we're choosing is the kind that makes us more resilient to the stressors that we can't control in our lives. And so the kind of stress is really what I want to emphasize. It's not just, hey, just keep adding stress, you'll be tougher, et cetera. You're rewiring your body. And the fascinating part is that when we choose stress, and stress that's safe, with the stressors, we are releasing growth factors in our brain, such as brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like a natural fertilizer that builds neural connections and neural pathways. It's helping us remember how we handled the stress. So the stress response doesn't just end after our heart stops pounding and we gave our speech or did whatever stressful event. for up to weeks and even years later, there's a change that's happening in the connections in our body, right? So the hardware is actually changing so that we are really upgrading our brain's ability to handle stress. And that's really a very profound thing, because when we don't take on these safe types of stressors that are rewarding, we don't upgrade our biology. So the process of neuroplasticity, of shaping our brain, works both ways. And this is true of all the stressors. Think of it like a muscle. If you are constantly lifting the weights or putting yourself in these mild to moderately stressful situations, you're building the muscle to become resilient. When you are not, when you are choosing to not engage in stress and giving into comfort, which, we all prefer to do, our brain likes the status quo, we are losing that muscle, right? So we are making ourselves more vulnerable to the mental and physical illnesses that are rampant today.
I have to share a story. I was speaking with a friend recently and we were kind of catching up. And then, so what are you watching these days? What are you watching these days? And I was like, oh, I just saw this amazing documentary called Join or Die. It's all about democracy and what's contributing to the healthy democracies versus that. And he goes, Resa, I'm watching The Jackal. So it's sort of this like stress of something kind of intellectual where I'm going to learn something versus something mindless, sitting on the TV and doing nothing versus actually engaging in a crossword puzzle or doing a jigsaw puzzle or having a more academic discussion. I want to ask toxic stress, like really toxic work environments where people actually get depressed and they lose self-esteem and confidence, and that daily exposure to stress of a negative workplace environment. And not the same, but also what we know about mothers that are dealing with chronically ill children, that constant stream of stress and how those kinds of stresses actually can do a negative effect on our health.
Unquestionably, the toxic stressors are generally ones that are unpredictable and uncontrollable, and exactly what you just mentioned. The good stressors, again, they are deliberate, so we can turn them off when we can say, okay, I did X or Y, I learned the skill, I watched this show about democracy, and then I take time to recover. I sleep, I let my body kind of take in that information. That's where the growth is happening. When people are exposed to these toxic stressors and they're unpredictable and uncontrollable, they're more chronic. There isn't that opportunity to actually kind of turn off that stress response. And that's when we get into that range of harm.
Your CEO study.
Yeah. So one of my roles is I'm the medical director of an executive health program where we take care of CEOs and senior vice presidents of major companies. And we do several studies in our clinic. One of the ones we did is we were interested in how level of stress, of how they perceived the stress, affected their rate of aging. So we measured rate of aging through epigenetic clocks. And for people who are not familiar with that, there are certain sites in our human DNA that can be predictive of the rate at which we're biologically aging, which can be very different from our chronologic age. And we were interested in how stress and resilience interacted with a person's biological age. And we went into it with this hypothesis, right? That, well, the lower the stress level, the higher the resilience. Well, those people are just going to live the longest. And what was really profound in our study is amongst the people that had a lower resilience level, which we measured through a standardized questionnaire, people who had a moderate amount of stress, kind of comparable to the national norm, had a younger biological age than the people who had very little stress, right? So that's really the opposite of what you would think, because we've been so conditioned to think that all we have to do is just cut out the stress from our lives and we're going to live forever. So again, very eye-opening that there's a hormetic association of the amount of stress in our life and our age, right? We've been talking about chronic disease, but this pertains to longevity because the same pathways that contribute to chronic disease, the oxidative stress, the mitochondrial dysfunction, the inflammation, a whole host of others, are the same pathways that we know are the hallmarks of aging that affect our rate of aging. And what I think is so important about hormesis is this is a simplified approach to health, right? This is a systems biology way of not chasing one illness like heart disease or an illness like diabetes with different medications and treating them at a kind of downstream pathway where one drug affects one process. We are saying at the core, what are the things that affect our health? And how can we create a unified, simple way of being healthy and living longer? We can build health. And of course, we should reduce all the things that can potentially harm us. But I think sometimes it's really hard to do because we have to resist what's so easy in our environment to give into. But this other piece of building health, loving the challenge, learning to trust that our bodies were made for stress is really the part that's missing. And that's what I want to highlight through this book and through our conversation.
So beautiful. Your CEOs, what was the age range and what was the gender balance?
The average age is around 53, about 70% male, about 30% female.
And mixed in terms of racial ethnic background and socioeconomics, I would assume because of the sort of selection bias of the population is probably on the higher end.
Yeah, it is predominantly white from an ethnic background.
So Sharon, how do you think you're different having written this book?
I will tell you actually a backstory of when I learned that I had the opportunity to write this book, that I got the book contract. You would think my first response would be joy, but it was actually overwhelming because I work full time, have research responsibilities, clinical, administrative,
Personal.
I have 3 children. And the thought of where am I going to get the time to do this? So at first it was, your typical stress response. And then as I got into the writing and into really tuning into why I wanted to do this, it was a classic example of how this became a good stress. Because I have such a deep desire to contribute to healthcare, to the lives of people, for people struggling, right? Every day I work with people struggling to not rely on medication, struggling not to need treatment after treatment and specialist after specialist, struggling to access care. And this became a way to make some contribution at whatever level I can to help people find the way. I wrote it for people who are in that predicament. And it had such a healing effect because for me, it was the good stress, right? It set off such a sense of reward, this cascade that builds confidence, that helps you realize that what you can do matters. And to me, this was the epitome of good stress, right? And in healthcare, as you know, burnout amongst physicians is a really big area right now. Over 50% of the clinical workforce is burnt out. And when you put energy into something that has low value and low meaning, it creates a burnout energy. When you put energy into something that is rewarding, that makes you feel you're contributing, it creates a regenerative energy. And for me, it gave me this incredible amount of regenerative energy that it becomes so sustaining in an environment where what you want to do for your patients is sometimes limited by so many factors that make healthcare complex. So that's kind of the backstory behind good stress and how I've put it into my life.
I love that. I have to say that I reflect the same in terms of my own experience with writing. It was such a joy when people say, how was it? It was so much more fun than I would have imagined. I wasn't dreading it. I was looking forward to it, but I didn't really think that it was going to be as joyful and fun as it has been, as it continues to be. Part of it, if I can share, is I think it's because when you know that you've written something that is accurate, it's good information, it's hopefully going to help people, it summarizes, again, all that you've been working on to try to make a difference in patients' lives, and try to make people's lives easier, better, more efficient, all the above. It's like win, 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 win. Finally, I want to ask you about your voice. This is the Visible Voices podcast, and I ask my guests, when did you realize you had a voice and when did you start using your voice? And I'll say as a science researcher physician? When did you realize you had it, and when did you start using it?
Resa, that's a fascinating question because it's an evolution, right? At every step, you think you have a voice, but the more you invest in your voice, the more you realize that your voice grows and what you are capable of sharing and how you share it is a constant evolution. So there's a voice even early on when you start clinical practice because you have a voice with your patients. But over time, for me, it's evolved in a voice in writing, a voice in communicating through national media. So I think the scope of the voice is what's changing. So I would say, I hope that it continues to grow. It's not as though I think I hit a moment where I realized I had a voice. I think it's realizing that you can change your voice and build your voice. And the more you invest in doing that, the more you have the opportunity and ability of bringing others along with you and making your voice broadcast really broader.
The Resa Wrap-Up. Special thanks to Dr. Sharon Berquist. Audience, please check out her book, The Stress Paradox: Why You Need Stress to Live Longer, Healthier, and Happier. 80% of chronic disease is preventable. That means you can start with just one thing, just one way to introduce some positive stressors into your life. Probably you have some positive stress already, but you can improve upon that, increase it. That can be through high-impact exercise training. That can be adding more fruits and vegetables to your diet. That can be making sure that you sleep. So good stressors help build defenses against diseases and aging. Remember that recovery is essential for maximizing the benefits of this positive stress. And finally, eating. Normal eating patterns require periods of fasting. This moves us towards optimal health. Our bodies are screaming for help, and we need to return to basics. That means having periods of not eating. Cells need time to repair and detoxify. That's all I have for you this week, audience. See you next time. The Visible Voices podcast amplifies voices in the healthcare, equity, and current trends spaces. We are a production of the People's Media Network. Our team includes Dr. Giuliano DePortu and me, Dr. Resa Lewiss. Please find me through my website and on social media, Resa Lewiss, MD, or through the podcast, thevisiblevoicespodcast.com. Please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, please be sure to share the show with a friend. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the institution with which they are affiliated or identified. Information herein should never be used as a substitute for clinical judgment or for medical advice.